Welcome back to The Price of Business. I am your host, Kevin Price, talking to you about you and your business. One of my regular contributors, really one of my favorites to be featured on the program, is Lee Kaplan with Spicer, Kaplan, and Veselka. That's skv.com. It's a very, I think, a very important boutique law firm here in Houston that specializes in business law and does a phenomenal job at it. And Lee, always glad to have you on the program. You got good morning. You got a big case that has been in years, literally years in the making. In fact, I was on another channel when the story broke, and I remember watching the news, and for 24/7 on the cable news network, they would have images of the broken oil rig and oil oozing out of it around the clock under the water. Do you remember those images?
Oh, absolutely.
You couldn't turn on your TV without seeing that. And so tell the listener what I'm talking about. Tell the listeners what happened yesterday.
Well, the opening arguments for the last Deepwater Horizon criminal trial began yesterday. And this is something that's played out over almost 5 years because the explosion was in April 2010. And one of the well site leaders, the one who had already gone off his shift 4 hours before the explosion and was actually asleep in his bed, is our client, Robert Kaluza. 3 of my partners are over here in trial in New Orleans, and I actually watched some of the opening arguments yesterday. And they're defending him against a misdemeanor Water Pollution Act violation, a clean water violation. And essentially, he's charged with having negligently failed to understand that some pressure tests didn't show that the well was all right, but instead should have indicated the well was not all right. Well, his successor, who did plead to this violation and was the guy in charge when the explosion actually occurred and when this test was completed, had 4 people under him who had among them like 100 years of experience on rigs as well. And all 5 of them agreed that was a successful, what's called a negative pressure test. Those other 4 people, unfortunately, all perished in the accident. And so the last person to be tried is Robert Kaluza, and that trial is ongoing now. I'm guessing it'll last 2 weeks, maybe 3, but probably 2 weeks.
Yeah, and when did that incident happen? When did the accident happen?
The accident was April of 2010. I don't remember the exact date, but I think it was the latter part of April at night. So when this occurred, of course, all the power went out. People are stumbling around in the dark in various rooms on the rig until they got out to where, obviously things were bright as day because of all the flames from the explosion and fire. It was really a horrifying scene, and I think that the newspaper, the television cameras never really fully captured just how horrific this was. It was an unbelievable tragedy, accident, and obviously all the oil that was released, we saw the results of that on shore, but for the people on the rig, it was truly terrifying.
Oh, I bet it was. Now, it took forever, literally years, to get to the point where you're finally having a trial. Explain how that happened.
Well, I don't want to excoriate the government too much, but people may recall that many people were charged with felonies. Mr. Kaluza, for example, was charged with 22 felonies, 11 counts of negligent manslaughter and 11 counts of grossly negligent manslaughter. And this was a guy who'd literally been on the rig about 4 days, and he was not on duty when this happened. First of all, the negligent manslaughter counts were dismissed by the district judge. The government appealed that. That was affirmed. So now it came back, and there's still a question of gross negligence, and the government finally admitted or realized they weren't going to be able to prove that. They dismissed the gross negligence counts. Frequently prosecutors will overcharge and try to get a plea on lesser charges. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that may well be justified. The greater charges are potential. In this case, you could argue whether or not that was the case, but Mr. Kaluza always wanted to stay in court, and sometime in the last 6 months or so, the government gave up on being able to prove grossly negligent manslaughter. So now all that's left is this one count, and Mr. Kaluza's had his life upended by this process. I mean, that's been nearly 6 years. He wants his trial, and his trial is ongoing now on the pollution charges, and obviously one of the issues will be causation. Did he cause this, or was he a cause of it, or all these other people and events like the blowout preventer not working? Is that what caused the water pollution?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And is this a felony as well?
No. This is a misdemeanor, but I'm not sure about this, but I believe it does have with it the possibility of prison time.
Wow. Well, that is interesting. Another huge and I think very interesting story was over the weekend, the passing of Justice Scalia. And, I was kind of shocked because even though at his age there was no indication that he was having any health issues, and certainly a brilliant jurist, always challenged conventional wisdom, and the kind of guy, because he really doesn't care about political correctness, he doesn't care about, social proprieties, he just kind of told things like it was. I'm not sure we'll ever get a jurist like him again.
Well, what I thought was extraordinary about him, and others obviously may disagree, is that he had his views of the Constitution, and they weren't shifting or molding, and he really was not a conventional person. I think that people would have gotten the idea in what was called the flag burning case. Mm-hmm. Long time ago, some protesters burned a U.S. flag, and they were prosecuted for that. Well, Scalia was a First Amendment believer, and he said it cannot be illegal because of the First Amendment for you to burn the U.S. flag. That's free speech. Now, it was a 5-4 decision, so he made the difference there. He sided with people who you would normally think of as the liberal group on the U.S. Supreme Court. There are a number of conservatives who are outraged by that, but that just shows his devotion to the principles he had to the Constitution as he understood it.
Yeah. And I've evolved over time. When I got involved in politics in 1980, as a freshman in college, I would have called myself a three-legged stool Republican in the Reagan tradition: strong defense, strong family, free market economics. And I've really evolved to be much more libertarian. That view is a libertarian position. I think that, totalitarian regimes around the world throw people in prison for even mishandling the flag. I think the United States, true freedom, the true texture of the United States of America, demands that we allow that kind of free speech. I mean, it literally demands it, and it has the strength, and it should have the strength and the robustness, if you will, the character of the nation to be able to handle that type of free speech. So people change. I certainly have. I kind of consider mine a maturation process. I guess getting towards a view that was more like Scalia's. I would have agreed with that decision. I would have concurred with that in the court.
Well, the other story I've heard about Scalia more recently that I really appreciate is one told by David Axelrod. And Axelrod was an Obama advisor. And when there was an earlier vacancy on the Supreme Court, Scalia, who is certainly Axelrod's political polar opposite, said to Axelrod, I want you to give the president some advice, or when you give him advice, send us someone smart. Scalia wanted vigorous debate at the Supreme Court. He wanted really gifted people so that all these principles and issues could be discussed thoroughly, and the court would have a better chance of reaching the right decision. He wasn't afraid that his opposition would be talented. He wanted somebody smart to be appointed by Obama, and that led to 2 appointments, Sotomayor and Elena Kagan. And whatever people might say about them and their politics, they're undoubtedly smart.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interesting. I think it's it's going to be an interesting thing to see what happens. We know that in the last year appointment of Bush, in the last year of his administration, that Barack Obama was quick to announce that it was inappropriate for him to appoint a jurist, as a lame duck. He's not believing that for himself. What do you think is going to end up happening? I think the GOP are going to be walking dead if somehow he's able to get someone appointed to the court in his last year.
Well, I think it would be a mistake, and it's already been a mistake for the Republicans to say we're not going to consider somebody or he shouldn't appoint somebody. And first of all, I fully appreciate that this is exactly what the Democrats have done in the past, but it's time for people to do the right thing regardless of party. If they want to reject Obama's nominee on the merits after a hearing, they may do that, but there are people Obama can appoint who are talented, and I think this is an example of the kind of infighting that may very well affect the election. If the Republicans they may be the party of no if they take this position. And even if Obama does get some quote-unquote liberal appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court, there are going to be several other people who are going to vacate the court through resignation or illness or death. And whoever is the next president will get more appointments. So I wouldn't make this the rampart on which to stage the last stand for the U.S. Supreme Court. I think the Republicans are making a mistake if they refuse to consider a nominee that the president sends up within the next 6 months or so.
Well, that's your take. I appreciate it. It is Lee Kaplan with Smizer, Kaplan and Visoka. And just for a differing view, I think the GOP will be, like I said, dead men walking if they don't figure out a way to keep this vacant for a year. That's just my view on the whole deal because really for so many voters, as you well know, both sides are so tired of the establishment candidate, both the Democrats and the Republicans. Boy, it would look like a huge establishment move on their part. But I love your analysis, and I always appreciate it. And it's skv.com, and look forward to having you back on soon.
Thank you. Look forward to it.
You bet. When we come back, more for you. Do want to remind you, best content here shows up over there at usdailyreview.com. While there, like it on Facebook, follow it on Twitter. And this is The Price of Business.